Going into this episode, it was clear that there was a lot left up in the air, and it wasn't entirely clear how it was going to be handled. I know there were many fans that held the same nervousness and excitement that I had when going into this story. It's been promoted and set up within the show as a huge episode, and ultimately, how is it all going to be pulled off? So let's go through every aspect of this episode that I can and discuss what they got right and what they got wrong, at least in my estimation. I think with this episode, more so than usual, it is important to say that this review is entirely my subjective opinion. There's no right or wrong way to experience this story, whether you loved or hated it. So let's just stay as calm as possible and discuss this family TV show known as Doctor Who. One thing this story showcases quite a lot of is the Doctor and the Master. These two share a lot of screen time, and as somebody who absolutely loves the dynamic of these two characters, that was an absolute treat. I love seeing these two characters on Gallifrey together, and I love most of these scenes with the two characters. There's this particularly fantastic moment.
Finally made you happy?
Ecstatic.
And has it calmed all the rage?
I don't think anything will ever do that.
I just adore that. And by the way, I do love the look of Gallifrey in this story. We've seen Gallifrey in a poor state before, but what makes this feel particularly unique is that it's so barren. There's nobody on Gallifrey, which feels very different to the Time War. Gallifrey is already destroyed as opposed to Gallifrey being destroyed. Concerning the B-plot with the companions, I think that worked pretty well. I was genuinely afraid that Graham was going to die in this story, and I'm so thankful that he didn't. I really loved what we got out of Yaz and Graham this time around. They have this one scene together that is quite emotional and lovely. As far as Ryan is concerned, he really didn't get that much to do within this episode, and what he did get didn't entirely work. He had this one scene in which he had to throw basically a big grenade over to a group of Cybermen, and that moment was fine, and it called back to the beginning of the season, but the moment afterwards is odd because Ryan is written in this very over-the-top way in which he is super cocky, and I just didn't really enjoy that moment, and that is consistent with his character, but they've done moments like that in the past, and I've never really enjoyed them, and they just don't click with me the way that I guess they would need to for those moments to work. There's also this part where a few characters decide to hide in Cybermen to escape the ship, and that moment itself is fine, and it does lead to a quite creepy scene in which the lone Cyberman is snooping around the suits, even if the moment doesn't lead to anything else important. I still think that it's a very enjoyable moment. So the stuff with the companions and the Cybermen works pretty well. The episode does manage to present it as though there is some real danger, and I genuinely felt as though a companion might die. Jumping back to the stuff on Gallifrey with our Time Lords, I really liked the way everything here was balanced. There's a lot in this episode. A lot of information has to be communicated, and I thought that the story flowed at a really good pace while allowing time for the Doctor to be given these scenes, furthering her understanding of the timeless child. The information is presented in a relatively standard way, but I found the information that was being presented to be so interesting that it didn't feel like it was just an exposition dump, because firstly, it was engaging, and secondly, the way the information is presented makes sense given the wider context of the actual story, and even though it was kind of standard presentation of information, it flowed and integrated within the story in a way that was balanced and flowed throughout. And I must say, Jodie Whittaker is absolutely fantastic in this part. She is truly brilliant and really sells every single second that she's on screen. She's got so many great moments, and she really proves, as she does every week, that she is the Doctor. Talking a little bit about Sacha Dhawan as the Master, I do quite like him in this part. He's good, he's got energy, he sells the serious moments, and he balances quite well off Jodie Whittaker's Doctor. I really do feel like this Doctor and Master pairing are nearly perfect. They just really feel like the right pairing, and the actors do an excellent job of absolutely selling every scene. With that said, there's a couple of moments with Sacha Dhawan's Master that do feel like they go slightly too far. They don't quite work.
That was quick! At least my
Most of the time, I think the Master is really good, but there are definitely a couple of moments that I wish had been calmed down because they take me out of the story slightly. So having talked a lot about the more general aspects of the story, I think it's time to talk about the big revelation of this finale, the fact that the Doctor is the Timeless Child. Now, at some point, I had realized with Ruth and the Timeless Child that how I felt about future developments of these plot threads was going to come down primarily to the execution rather than just what is happening. I wasn't somebody who just wrote off the idea of a pre-Hartnell Doctor as bad. Personally, I was just going to let the show take me where it was going to take me. And either it would be good or it would be bad, but I would experience what I was going to experience and then decide on my own, having actually seen the episode. And this scene, the way that it's presented to the viewer, it's great. Jodie Whittaker needs to sell this moment, and she completely does. I truly believed how deeply this revelation was affecting the Doctor, and that was entirely down to how great of an actor she is. It really is a great moment within the episode, regardless of how predictable it was. And I use that term loosely. It's not that I went into this story knowing that the Doctor was the Timeless Child, it's just that it was one of a short list of possibilities. I mean, part of me was hoping that it would somehow be something I hadn't thought of, but that was never very likely to happen because I and a number of fans have definitely had this stuck in our heads, thinking about who or what the Timeless Child is and what its influence on the story means. So for me, it really comes down to how well this revelation is portrayed on screen, and I think that was executed really well. Again, it's not that it was actually predictable, it's just that it was one of a short list of possibilities. In terms of what this means for the show, its past, its future, yeah, there's a lot to be said. I'm not going to get into the specifics of that here, but I will say that I like what's done with it within this story, and hopefully the Timeless Child plot thread continues to be used well. I'll definitely be discussing it more in a future video. But talking about it specifically in relation to the plot, I like what's done. And I do like how we have this moment where the Doctor realizes, because of the Ruth Doctor, that ultimately maybe this Timeless Child thing doesn't matter. Maybe it doesn't really affect who she is because she can still live her life and explore the universe, and who she was in the past doesn't really affect who she is now or who she will be in the future. And I do think that's a great moment. And when she overloads the Matrix with all of her previous lives, that moment was absolutely fantastic, and it was completely sold, and I loved hearing the Doctor Who theme within the episode for the second time, I think, ever in the show. It really felt justified in that moment, and I adored that. And with all that said, I do feel that this moment should not have actually been in this episode. I can't help but feel that the show would have benefited from having the Doctor realize this later in the show, and it would have meant more if she had lived with this knowledge for a while before she came to the conclusion that she'll be fine even if she is the Timeless Child. But perhaps I'm misreading the scene, and maybe it's still going to have a big effect on her in Series 13, and she hasn't really completely sided with the Ruth Doctor in believing that it doesn't matter. I don't really know, but I just hope that more is done with this in the future of the show, because otherwise I think in hindsight it will feel that this was kind of rushed to the finish line. And I don't think that we're done with this here, but primarily what I'm talking about is that I want this revelation of the Timeless Child, the fact that it's a Doctor, to have a future influence on the character. Otherwise it won't mean as much for the show as I feel like it should. We do get introduced to the Cybermasters in this episode, although I do prefer the term Cyberlords, but honestly that's neither here nor there, and that was a fantastic moment. I hadn't really seen that coming, and I thought that reveal worked really well, and it's a very interesting idea, Time Lords being cyber-converted, and I think the design is actually really good too. I'm not 100% sure how I feel about their mouths, but other than that, I think they're quite cool. And jumping back to the Cybermen, I do feel that while they worked as a threat for the companions, they were kind of sidelined within this story. They were taken out surprisingly easily. The Master just easily shrunk the lone Cyberman, and that did kind of undermine the entire threat that was built up for 2 episodes. And the Cybership was surprisingly easy to just blow up as well, so the resolution with the Cybermen felt a little bit cheap. But it was understandable considering that we had arguably much more important things to deal with, but it was made up for slightly by the introduction of the Cybermasters. There's another great scene in this random TARDIS with the Doctor and her companions. It's a very emotional moment, and the way it is played out, it really did feel like it was the end of the Doctor's time with these companions. I didn't think that 13 was going to die, but I really didn't think that she was going to see these companions again, which it now seems like she actually will, and I had no idea how she was going to make it out. I do love the final scene between the Doctor and the Master. I said before that these actors are great together, but in this scene specifically, they both completely brought it. I completely believed that 13, the pacifist, would be in this situation, struggling with this decision, and I loved how the Master tried to actually get her to push the button. It was really just a fantastic television scene. Also, it seems clear to me that the Master and some of the Cybermasters escaped Gallifrey based on the final line that he had during that scene. I really hope that we get to see more with those Cybermasters, because I'd be very interested to see what is done with them. Personally, I'm hoping that just a couple of them manage to escape with the Master, and that they become the focus of a future story, but we'll see what ends up happening in the future. Also, I love that at the end of the story, just when 13 gets a few seconds of peace, or at the very least quiet to herself, she gets swooped back into the action as she's thrown into a space prison. Although, admittedly, she probably will have a bit of time to herself now, it's just so tragic that she just tries to catch her breath for a little bit and gets thrown into more drama. And how exactly did Dune make it inside the TARDIS? The episode doesn't say. And realistically, they probably couldn't. But it leads to a moment that really works as the end of this story, and I do like the final note of the Doctor saying, "What?" Now, this story isn't perfect. There are moments within the episode that honestly do feel a bit cheap. For example, the resolution at the very end where Ko Sharmus comes in to save the day, it kind of works, but it feels a little cheap that he gets shot 20 times and then somehow is still able to push the button. Like, did I honestly just miss something? And there are several moments like this that take me out of the story a little bit. But at the end of the day, I'm not all that bothered by little things like this, and I do have a really great time with this story, but I must acknowledge that there are points within the episode that feel like they don't completely earn the moments they're going for, but that they partially earn those moments. And that for me is why, while this is a really enjoyable story that I have a lot of fun with and has a ton of things that I love, it's not one of the absolute best finales, because it kind of cheats multiple times and takes me out of the story a little bit. So it has the potential to be one of the absolute best finales, but comes just short of it when concerned with some relatively minor stuff in the grand scheme of things that are ultimately going to take me out of the story when I rewatch it, like the thing with Ko Sharmus, where it's like, oh, that doesn't quite work, and that's why this isn't one of the absolute best finales, it's just a damn good one. Overall, I thought that this was a really excellent way to close out a truly fantastic series of Doctor Who. We have a really well-balanced and engaging story with a great A-plot and a really solid B-plot. Our main cast is mostly brilliant, and I really enjoy the dynamic of this Doctor and this Master. The big moments of this story are largely executed really well, even though there are little grievances I have with tiny moments of this episode. This was a fantastic story that I'm not going to be forgetting anytime soon, and I'm going to give The Timeless Children a rating of 9.5 out of 10. Thank you for joining me for this review. I'll be very curious to hear your thoughts on this episode, whether you liked it or you didn't. Just make sure to be respectful in the comments, so feel free to leave something down below. I hope to see you around soon for more videos on Series 12, Series 13, all sorts of Doctor Who related content, but if not, that's totally cool. Just know that I appreciate your time here today, and with that said, that's going to do it for now, folks. Thank you very much for watching. Take care, and have a lovely week.